Kia ora, everybody. David Faulkner here. I am the General Manager of Property Brokers Property Management. I am here today with the amazing Sonia Booth, who is an absolute legend within our company. How long have you been with Property Brokers for, Sonia?
Oh, just over 15 years.
Just over 15 years. And so I've been with Property Brokers 13 years, 10 years, and I've been away and I'm back 3 years. So there's a wealth of knowledge. And you're going to need it in this job because we're seeing lots of changes to the Residential Tenancies Act again. So we're going a bit of a 360, aren't we, Sonia? We're going back to the way it was when it was a national government last time. Labour's made all these changes about making it protecting more tenants' rights, you could say, and making sure they're going to have a valid reason.
Yep.
That's all changing.
Yep, we're going to go back, and there's quite a few changes regarding terminations, address for service, bonds, and also pets coming in. So, so just to kick off, we've got we're going to be talking about enabling the online bond lodgements and the terminations of the tenancies, etc., tribunal hearings, smoking, and the pet bonds. But
let's have a look at the bond system first.
Yeah.
This is quite a lot of landlords probably won't deal with this a lot, but we deal with this a lot in our job. I mean, it's been a very, very archaic system, very paper-based, people entering data from a bond sheet which has to be signed. There's lots of mistakes that can be made. You may not be able to read the bond form clearly. They're digitising things. It sounds a lot better. What's going on?
So basically, we're going to see a new bond system. It's all going to be digital and online. And they're going to run the old system and the new system actually side by side initially. So moving forward, the Real Me, everybody will be using a Real Me login. And so the paper as such will be disappearing, and we won't be seeing a bond form because signatures, etc., will be held under the Real Me accounts. So that's just basically for easier lodgements and hopefully refunds. So these changes come into effect on the 2nd of December.
Last year, so these changes have already been implemented.
Yeah. So basically, the bond's online. When a tenant makes a bond payment moving forward, the initial payment through a company will be done through our software. For a private landlord, they'll be able to do it via the online tenancy services bond lodgement screen. If your tenant only pays for half the bond and then they need to pay the further payment for the full bond amount, that would actually become a top-up rather than a further lodgement, and that would also need to be done through the tenancy services website.
Yeah, so it's actually caused a few issues for big companies like ourselves because this has been rushed. The reason, so I think this is our gut feeling around this, is that National wanted to get it passed before Christmas. So they put a bit of heat on tenancy services, so it has not really been tested. So it's a bit of we see as we go, and we're learning as we go. So what about things like, change of tenants and, change of landlords? Is all that going to be done digitally as well?
That will be done digitally, but at the moment they're still working through those systems. And also when we get onto the pets, that's obviously going to be something that's coming as well.
Yeah, so pets is a very, very emotive topic. All right.
Yeah.
So anyway, what have we got next? We've got change in termination. So what's going on here? We've had all these laws passed by Labour. They're all going to be reversed. Explain to me what's going on.
So basically, we're going to go back to how it used to be. So we're going to have a 90-day without reason for periodic tenancies termination, if needed. 42 days when an owner or a family member wants to move into a property, an employee or contractor. There does need to be a clause in the tenancy agreement if that clause is to be put through, or if the property is sold or vacant possessions needed for an unconditional sale. Finally, tenants will go from 28 days back to 21 days when they're giving notice for a periodic tenancy. Fixed term to end the tenancy, landlord or tenant could give notice between 90 and 21 days prior to the end of that fixed term tenancy. If they don't, that will obviously would still roll through at the moment to periodic. As of the 30th of April, this is when this will come in.
So the fixed term tenancies, if you're still on one at the moment, it doesn't mean if that fixed term tenancy expires end of April, all rules apply.
Yes.
Yeah, and anything that expires after that New rules
New
apply.
rules apply.
Okay. Do you think we're going to see more people going back to fixed-term tenancies, more landlords reverting back to fixed-term tenancies? Any recommendations there on what type of tenancy agreement we should be using?
Well, I think it's going to be up to the parties and what's going to suit those parties best. But yes, I mean, we may see people going back in towards the fixed term just to tie in for security.
Yeah. Retaliatory notices. I mean, we've got a little bit about that later on. I mean, what's your views there? Do you think we're going to see people using this to get rid of bad tenants, and what's the risks along with that?
Well, I think the retaliatory notice, we're going to have to be really careful. There is some clear guidelines again around being able to give without notice, obviously, which we've outlined here. If a tenant had come in and said to us some maintenance hadn't been undertaken, for instance, and then the landlord didn't want to do that maintenance and thought, right, I'm going to issue a 90-day notice to terminate this tenancy, that could be seen as retaliatory. And so we could see cases like that obviously go to tribunal.
Yeah, so before you decide that if you've got a tenant that you're not sure about, we seriously recommend first try and resolve the issues with the tenant. Use a property manager. We'll be able to give you the best advice. Do not use it in terms of, you're just to get rid of somebody who you're struggling to deal with. You're exposing yourself to retaliatory notice. Okay, on to the next one.
Yeah.
Okay. So we've got some updates here. A lot of landlords will not be aware of this.
Yeah.
And some of the relevance around this, around modernising of notices, and we're able to start using, things like Messenger and WhatsApp as like an address for serving notice.
Yeah.
Do you want to give us a bit more on this?
So basically electronic addresses have been expanded. So the likes of Messenger, WhatsApp, etc., and a mobile number are now taken as being okay for a notice to be served to a landlord if they're wanting to end their tenancy. There's also email addresses obviously need to be used for the address for service. The tribunal will decide matters without holding a hearing moving forward as well, which is quite a big change for particularly us property managers.
Yeah.
This won't happen for cases that involve termination or landlord rights of entry to a premise or a boarding house.
So, for example, let's use an example. You could use rent arrears, but you're not seeking termination. It's just maybe a money audit. Could it be used in a case like that?
But sorry.
So if you're just going to say you've got to give notice, if you're going to send a claim for rent arrears to the tenancy tribunal, but you don't want to seek termination, it's just a money order.
Yeah, it's just a money order. So obviously it's going to be a lot easier where the parties don't actually have to attend. They'll just get the order will just be sent to you.
So things like market rent cases and little things like that where they're just managed so they can get through them quick and speed up the whole process.
And I think that's the key, that they're going to speed up the whole process with us.
That's good. That's good. Okay, all right. On to the next one. Probably the most emotive one with a lot of people, pets. And we're seeing, there's people renting for longer. The average length of a tenancy now with property brokers is roughly approximately about 3 years. That's increased significantly. You're seeing people who will be long-term renters, lifetime renters. Pets, I actually think this is a good move. What's happening with pets?
So basically, they are looking at building a system for pet bonds and pet consent. So obviously if a tenant's in a property, they will request to the landlord to see whether they're permitted in their tenancy agreement to have a pet. And if the tenant allows them, they'd have to have a valid reason for refusing that consent. There could be a 2-week bond collected for a pet bond.
Right.
Yeah.
So this is on top of the 4-week
on top
bond?
of the normal general bond that we're collecting on the house.
Okay, so a tenant may have to come up with a 6-week bond
Potentially.
if they've got a pet. So, what type of pets are we talking about here? Is this any pet? Have you got a fish? But is this common sense applies?
I think common sense applies, and it's most likely going to be dogs and obviously like the cat or something. So there will be some cases where there could be valid reason for refusing consent, and that may be some of those points that we've outlined there, not suitable for the pet. Obviously, Dog Control Act, breach of law prohibiting the pet on the property, so there could be body corporate coming into play, and also it could be like that you're on a rural property and it's not actually appropriate to have a pet there. So, and one other we note there is that if a rent increase is actually undertaken on the property, you can actually top up your pet bond as part of that.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so you keep that. I mean, this is, again, I think this is a bit of common sense coming into play here. You know, I mean, tenants should be allowed to have pets, but you've got to be able, the landlords have that protection at the top of the bonds. I mean, so issues, Dog Control Act, so this is things like the dog isn't registered.
Yeah.
You know, so it's got to be council registered. What are the things that we're going to do with property brokers to ensure that, you know, if tenants are coming to us with pets, I mean, bearing in mind, this isn't probably going to make legislation, it ain't going to come into law towards the end of the year, that's what we're hearing. But what can a landlord expect from a property manager in doing background checks?
Well, obviously, would be looking at the dog and making sure that it's going to be registered. We may look at previous references from other properties, and sometimes, you know, like things that we used to do a lot was like the landlord may actually meet the pet and make sure that they're actually happy with putting that pet in place.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay, so there you go. They may meet Rover the dog and make sure that Rover the dog's well behaved. Okay, so what are the little loopholes or maybe the things that, you know, landlords may not be aware of, which we're going to cover here? What are the things we need to be, you know, little trips that could get us into trouble if we're not careful?
Yeah, so obviously giving notice to end the tenancy when there's a dispute. We're not going to be able to do that. That, again, would be that coming into that retaliatory termination provision. Tenants applying within 28 working days for a notice to be cancelled.
Yeah.
So basically, if they have applied, they'll have up to 12 months to now apply to a tribunal. And if they apply within 28 days, they can actually ask for that notice to be cancelled.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. But if the tenancy ends, they can still go back and say, look, this is retaliatory notice. Exemplary damage, I think, off the top of my head, I think it's $6,500.
$6,500, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And there could be like other things like removal costs as well, as which the tenants could claim for.
Yes, absolutely. Possibly.
Yeah.
Fixed term tenancies, obviously we mentioned this before. Obviously anything that expires before the 30th of April 2025, the old rules will still apply.
Yeah.
So
and
obviously there's a few wee changes going with withdrawing from a tenancy for family violence. And that's now going to include children as well. Yeah.
Right. So, I mean, some of the things, I mean, family violence, we haven't really touched on it. You don't see a lot of issues. It does happen from time to time, unfortunately. Say you've got, you know, disputes between tenants who aren't family, and maybe there's been a bit of a shenanigans and the mates, the flatmates. And, I mean, does that apply in those circumstances?
Actually, interestingly enough, we've actually had quite a few cases of this actually applying. So, yes, if there's a situation of violence and there's records to back up that has occurred between flatmates, they can actually use the family violence clause.
That's good to know.
Yeah.
It's good to have you here, Sonia. You're an absolute wealth of knowledge. Let's look at the time frame for these that are coming into effect now. So obviously the bond has already happened. Today's the day for changes of termination, so big changes there across the whole industry.
Yes.
Yeah. You know, modernising of notices, the enabling of tenancy tribunal. One thing we didn't touch on this is smoke alarm. Smoking doors can be prohibited. Now, interestingly, there was a case where we're aware of where a tenant was smoking in a property, but because there's nothing in the RTA about this, an adjudicator actually went in favour of the tenants, which to me is absolutely madness. I would have thought keeping the place reasonably clean and tidy would include the smell of smoke. But you would, again, common sense, smoking indoors can be prohibited. That's coming from the 20th of March. And they've probably got a little bit of work to do, haven't they, Sonia, in terms of the pets? And the pet
I don't
bonds.
think that there's they've actually got to build a whole new system for those bonds to be lodged in, because it's going to be separate, obviously, from the other bonds that house their general bond. So that is going to take probably at least another 6 or so months.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So, what should the people do if they've got any questions? And
feel free to contact any of our property managers, and we will send out obviously some frequently asked questions following this webinar as well, and just some other points that may be of interest. But please contact someone at Property Brokers, and we're all here to help.
That's been absolutely fantastic, Sonia. Thanks a lot for putting all that work in. Thanks a lot for getting our property managers trained up, ready for these changes. And thank you to you for tuning in and watching this webinar. Marty, you are.